Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner, and in today's pre-Tour of Flanders video, I want to talk about Jumbo-Visma and a little bit on Soudal Quick-Step. Now, Jumbo-Visma's Wout van Aert has to be one of the hot favorites here. We all know he's one of the three favorites with Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogacar, and of course Wout van Aert. But Jumbo-Visma, without a doubt, is hands down the number one team, right? You look at it and you go, wow, UAE Team Emirates, they're not even in the top three, top five strongest teams when we're talking about going into Flanders. When we think about Albacete de Koenig with Mathieu van der Poel, he's got a strong squad, right? He's got one Søren Kragh Andersen, but as a whole, neither one of those teams even remotely compare to the strength of Jumbo-Visma. They have been dominating. So let's talk about why they've been dominating. When we look at the big victories at Omloop Het Nieuwsblad from Dylan van Baarle when he won, that day they're doing dominant riding with Dylan van Baarle going solo into the finish. But then when you start looking at the other races, Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, remember that group, that small group coming down the finish with Matej Mohoric in there, Tim Wellens from UAE Team Emirates, and they just can't get their act together. They're not working smooth. They're not making the two riders of Thijs Benoot and, of course, Van Hooijdonk in there. They're not making those two riders do a lot of work. They're able to get free rides, and then Thijs Benoot jumps on the right side, tacks all the way up to the finish, and finishes solo there to win Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. Now, when you see that kind of strength, that race right there, they got the right amount of numbers in the front group, but the chemistry with Matej Mohoric and the other breakaway riders not taking advantage of having two riders from Jumbo-Visma in the break to force them to chase. They were just chasing each other the whole time. That allows those two riders that really don't have the best shot of winning the sprint at the finish. That allows those riders a little bit of rest coming into the finish. And then, of course, like I said, with that attack from Thijs Benoot, he's able to get away because everybody else is too tired from jacking and following each other left and right, especially Matej Mohoric, who's made multiple errors in those last 5 kilometers of Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne. When we look at the other races after Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, I want to focus mainly on Soudal Quick-Step that's pulling on the front like crazy, keeping the gap to the breakaway riders too close and allowing Jumbo-Visma way too much rest before we get into the crucial part of the race. So Soudal Quick-Step riding that whole length of time early is allowing the whole Jumbo-Visma team back there to just relax. We look at EF Education. They did the same thing in one of the classic races where all their guys got so motivated on the front, they're pulling for 20, 30 kilometers on the front, which again is allowing Jumbo-Visma right before the crucial part of the racing when you should be at the front, not the 20 or 30 kilometers before that, but when you should be at the front, allows Jumbo-Visma that rest for that whole 20 or 30 kilometers, that whole time just before the crunch time, when really it should have been Jumbo-Visma pulling through there. The EF Education director even said so later in their meetings when they covered it on air for GCN, where he talked about, okay, you guys were good at the last race, but you were over aggressive. I want you guys to be less aggressive and be better at the finish of the races, more or less is what their director sportif was asking for in that meeting. When we look at another race, again, this time is Trek Segafredo on the front, right? Dwarsdorp-Vlaanderen, Trek Segafredo, they're 5-6 guys wide, pulling on the front in the wind, all 5 of them in the wind. And then when they go over the top of the climb, they're all got it completely strung out single file, while the Jumbo-Visma guys are like, okay, you guys want to ride the front at this point in time when it's not even the crucial moment in the race, and you want to pull the brake back and bring the gap down on the breakaway so we don't even have to ride before we get into the crunch period. Okay, no problem. So that's 4 classic races right there, and they've won 5 early classic races here before Tour of Flanders with 4 different riders, and 4 of them I just mentioned of how the tactical mistakes of the other teams made it easier for Jumbo-Visma to win. Now, are those gimme races? No, you still have to win. Like I said, Jumbo-Visma is the hands-down best squad. There's no doubt about that. But when we're getting here into Tour of Flanders at 273 kilometers, when that early break goes, those teams Trek Segafredo, please stay off the front. Don't do the work for Jumbo-Visma. EF Education, you guys were a bunch of knuckleheads pulling like crazy way before the crunch period. You can't change the crunch period. The crunch period starts at a certain point in the race, and it's easy to see when it's coming. When we look at Tour of Flanders, you know the first 130 kilometers, 140 kilometers of the race is completely flat for 80 miles. So you don't need to be on the front for the first 80 miles. EF Education, Tim de Klerk from Soudal Quick-Step, you don't have to be on the front. And of course, Trek Segafredo with Mads Pedersen and the host of his teammates all riding the front for no reason. And then of course, Mads Pedersen blowing himself up. So with you three teams, please stay off the front. Now, Jumbo-Visma, what are they going to do if a big break goes up the road and all those teams say, hey, we're not going to work with you guys because we're a big-time knucklehead for at least 4 of the victories that you guys have had out of the 5 of this early season classic and helping you guys. So if they do that, if the teams say we're not going to help out, Jumbo-Visma is going to turn to those teams after that break gets out there and the gap starts extending. They're going to turn to those teams and say, well, we won 5 classics already. We would love to win Flanders too, of course, with Wout van Aert or Christophe Laporte. But we won 5, so we're just going to hang back here and we're going to let that gap grow out. Perfect. Let the gap grow out. And then sooner or later, other teams are going to come to the front. And most likely, it's going to be Alpecin de Koenig that gets on the front. And you know UAE team members are going to ride someone on there regardless of what I've already said Tadej Pogačar should or should not do. But you know they're going to be on the front. So Jumbo-Visma will have some help. But please, to the other teams, Trek Segafredo, you guys have not even been a player when it comes down to getting deep into these classic races, so you don't need to be on the front. Soudal Quick-Step, the Wolf Pups, you guys have been so far off the mark that you need as much recovery and as much time sitting on the wheels as you possibly can, so don't get on the front because there's other teams that will. Now, for Jumbo-Visma, if the racing goes as I would hope it would, they have to use 2-3 guys through the flat section and the early lumpy part here when we get into Flanders, and then they're still going to have some power left. If it was me, I would like to keep the gap a little bit closer so that it's around 4 or 5 minutes through the flat section. You can bring it back into a 3-minute zone, and then of course they can start sending up their favorites going up the road in Christophe Laporte and Thijs Benoot. Most likely Thijs Benoot first will start doing the damage early at the Tour of Flanders, and then the other teams have to start playing some chemistry there. So when we go back again to E3 Saxo Bank, I want to point out for Mate Mohoric, who is up there pulling in a group of 3 with Søren Kragh Andersen, and again with Nathan Van Hooijdonk sitting on, not even pulling. Mohoric, what were you doing up there when you're just pulling Nathan Van Hooijdonk, getting a free ride, and then later when Mathieu van der Poel jumped across and Wout van Aert jumped across, you still pulled through with 2 of the legends in the sport. Tadej Pogačar got up there, and then you still pulled through. So please, let's try to win Tour of Flanders and not just get a top 5, and let's put in some exciting racing here. But for Jumbo-Visma, if those tactics start to come into play where the other teams just say, okay, we see Thijs Benoot's in this front group. We know he just got done dropping everyone at the classic races where there were no Mathieu van der Poel and no Wout van Aert. Thijs Benoot just blew it up, and then we saw Laporte bridge across, and then Thijs Benoot delivered Laporte to an amazing back-to-back victory for the Frenchman to go big time in Dwars-Door-Vlaanderen. So if Christophe Laporte's in the front move, guys, you can't work with a Christophe Laporte. So this is the kind of chemistry I'd like to see when we start getting in the racing. And Jumbo-Visma, if they start seeing this negative racing, remember that's what it used to always be like against Peter Sagan. A lot of times people comment that Peter Sagan would stop working, but it was just the opposite. The other guys in the break would stop working with Peter Sagan, and he'd say, hey, I'm not just going to pull you guys to the finish. I'm going to let somebody else from this breakaway go up the road. So if you have Christophe Laporte in a group of 6 and nobody wants to work with Christophe Laporte, what Jumbo-Visma have to do, they have to start letting one rider go up the road, but keep an eye on UAE Team Emirates and keep an eye on Alpecin de Koenig, not let one of those riders go up the road, so that now Alpecin de Koenig and UAE Team Emirates have to work behind once the gap starts to get out there a little bit. You're like, Chris, it's crazy. You're telling us they shouldn't work, then you're telling us they should. At some point in time, everybody has to work. But for UAE Team Emirates, if everybody has to work, Wout van Aert, Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogacar himself have to do big time work to bring a group back. Wout van Aert's getting more fatigued. Mathieu van der Poel's getting more fatigued. Tadej Pogacar never gets fatigued. So now when he gets on the climb, maybe Tadej Pogacar can win. So Wout van Aert has to be careful every time when they start getting some kind of chemistry up front. If guys start wising up like they did with Peter Sagan back in the day and they don't work with Christophe Laporte and you let a group go, Christophe Laporte has to make the other guys chase in that group with him to bring that group back, or Christophe Laporte has to say, hey, if you guys aren't going to work, we're going to go back to Wout van Aert. Then you got to go back to Wout van Aert, Tadej Pogacar, Mathieu van der Poel, and those gaps all have to be close enough to where they could go backwards, grab their leaders, and now Christophe Laporte, Alpecin de Koenig, UAE team members would have to do a big-time chase to pull back that front group. That's what we should really see if everybody's racing intelligently, is where Wout van Aert, Mathieu van der Poel, they make other guys work with them, not Mate Mohoric, where he just works with anybody possible because he knows he's going to get a top 5 or a top 10 at the end of the day, and he's happy enough with that. If you want to win, the tactics have to be changing all the time. Many times throughout my career, plan A was to keep the team all together, get me to a point in the race where it was really the most difficult moment in the race you can possibly have. So the climbing was the hardest or the most explosive part of the race, and deep into the race so everybody was fatigued, and then you accelerate at that moment and you try to blow everybody up in one big acceleration. Remember, if you're Pogacar, you can drop everybody at 150K, then you can certainly drop them at 230K even more impressively. So if Tadej Pogacar can do one big acceleration, that might get rid of Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel when we're talking about those last 40 kilometers or 4 bergs left, when we're talking Ode de Quermont, the Tannenberg, and those climbs as such. If he can go deep into the race, he might not need multiple attacks to get rid of Wout van Aert and Mathieu van der Poel, and then we could see those two chasing Tadej Pogacar. Wout van Aert will have to come better than he was at his win at E3 Saxo Bank, because now the race is going to be a little bit deeper and Jumbo-Visma have to play it correct. Now, real quick on Soudal Quick-Step before I go, when we're looking at the Wolf Pack, those guys have been racing way too aggressive with the kind of power that they have. I see they have possibly 2 riders in the race. Casper Asgreen, who has been very good pedaling the bike in terms of performance and power, but he hasn't tactically been that good. He's been too aggressive and always attacking on the steeper parts of the climb. Attack someplace where the climb is less, follow everybody else through the difficult parts of the races. Then when they slow down, Casper Asgreen, when we're talking about in that last 40 kilometers of the race, if you can find an easier way to get away instead of trying to go on the harder parts of the climb, I think that would help Soudal Quick-Step. Julian Alaphilippe, who had some bike issues at the last race, he's going to have to come a little bit better, but he's been training big. So we'll see if the Frenchman can come good here at Tour of Flanders and give Soudal Quick-Step at least 2 riders back there to threaten for the win here at Tour of Flanders. All right, Jumbo-Visma, best of luck. All the other guys out there, give them hell out there, because Jumbo-Visma is going to make you guys look like child play if you keep riding the front the whole time like Trek Segafredo, like Soudal Quick-Step and EF Education already did. And Mate Mohoric and Tim Wellens and Kern Brussels Kearns, you guys did some ridiculous attacking from 5 kilometers out to help Jumbo-Visma have this dominating spring season. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on tomorrow's last edition before Tour of Flanders starts on Beyond the Cover. See you soon.